Hello, everyone, and welcome to Can You Hear Me? I'm Rob Johnson, president of Rob Johnson Communications.
And I'm Eileen Rochford, CEO of the Harbinger Group, a marketing and strategy firm. If you listen to Can You Hear Me regularly, you know that we love to take meaningful looks at the pressures business leaders face and the strategies they rely on to solve their problems. Right now, given the pressures that our C suite executives are facing because of the economic uncertainty that we have going on in the world, those pressures are so much bigger.
Mm.
They're horrible.
They really are. And so we were thinking, how do we dig into this and take a meaningful look at it? And I think we have a great plan today. So, how do these leaders navigate through stressful times? Fortunately, our guest today has more than a few ideas on the topic. She is Jennifer Jones, Chief Marketing Officer at Tidi Products, a Wisconsin-based medical equipment manufacturer. Jennifer Jones, JJ, as she is known.
What's happening? Yay.
Thanks for
Hi.
joining us today. We
Thanks for
appreciate it.
having me. Thanks for having me.
Oh gosh, it's our pleasure. Well, before we get to the meat of the discussion,
Sure.
why don't you give the listeners a little bit about your background,
hmm
your origin story, how you got to where you are?
Yeah, no, great, great. Thanks again. Thank you so much for having me. Excited for the time today. So as Rob mentioned, I'm Chief Marketing Officer here at Tidi Products. I've been here for almost 9 years. Prior to that, I spent several years with other med device organizations like Becton Dickinson, CareFusion, Cardinal Health. So deep med device experience. Started my career as a sales rep, and eventually moved into marketing. And quite honestly, have never looked back. It was a great transition in my career. And I always often tell people that while I'm a marketer by function, I'm really a developer of leaders by that's my passion project. And so I think what I really realized like probably mid of my career was I really liked marketing because it kept me connected to the end user of our products. And so being able to spend time with customers, especially in the healthcare environment, was extremely rewarding. But as I transitioned into different levels of leadership, it really became clear to me that really where I think I kind of came alive was really developing other leaders. I think there is a major deficit in leadership across all sectors. And I think it's often because like really high potential individual contributors are promoted into roles as leaders without a lot of training and or support through that process. And that's where leadership kind of falls apart. And so my like life's project and life's work has been how might I make an influence by the people I get the opportunity to lead to make them be the better leaders. I go to a leadership conference every year, and Craig Rochelle often says that when the leader gets better, everyone gets better. And so I believe that if we can make that impact in leaders that are developing, we can impact the world. So that's my origin story, and I'm pretty excited and proud of the path that I've been on thus far.
That is phenomenal. You just took the whole role of counseling as a communications counselor to, the C-suite to like the whole new stratosphere.
Yeah,
It's
that's
not
great.
just it's totally not just about what you say, but it's how you're functioning as a leader, and viewing yourself in that way is
Yeah.
so unique and original. And should I
Thank
call
you.
you JJ? Because I
Of
don't know.
course, we're
Are we
friends. We are
okay?
friends
Okay,
for
good.
sure. For sure. Welcome.
Thanks. That's just great. I love
Yeah.
it. I doubt there are many marketers out there who have that philosophy at all.
Mm,
It's very
mm.
unique.
Yeah. I mean, I think marketers, um, it's a very unique skill set. Folks ask me sometimes, like CMOs are actually one of the folks that turn over the most in executive seats. And I get asked the question why. And I think often it's because, every marketer has their own kind of flavor of marketing, how I do it, how I go translate voice of customer into insights, all those things. And so if they happen to join an organization that ascribes to their philosophy, they tend to stay longer. I think if they don't, there's a lot of turnover. And I think what's interesting about the marketing seat, which I think maybe folks miss, is that because you're like, I always tell people that marketing is like the spoke in the middle of the wheel. We have this power to influence, but not necessarily direct control of all functions in the organization. So in order to be a really impactful leader, you have to have influence. And I think if marketers don't recognize that that is a critical component of being a marketer and being a leader, I think they fall short. And so I think sometimes we're so focused on voice of customer and translating that into insights and launching a product and not recognizing that our role as a leader that's driving influence to deliver value for the company. And so maybe marketers don't see themselves often as leaders in that regard, but the reality is in the organization they're in, they are the leaders. Like, you own the voice of customer, and that's the only way companies can continue to generate value. And so I think that's it's a miss if they don't recognize their leadership role.
Before we dive in a little deeper, you just pointed out something really important, which was, the role of the marketer and coming and trying to put his or her stamp on, how the branding and how the messaging is happening. But
Yeah.
I know you also believe, because of the longevity you've had and
Yeah.
because of your passion for developing other people, a reason that, say, a CMO wouldn't get that opportunity to really think
Mm.
about professional development and how to develop those people is because they don't stay around long enough, and you've had the benefit of doing so, and it's dovetailed perfectly into what your passion is.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that, Rob. I mean, if I look at my leadership team, with the exception of one, they all have progressed through the ranks underneath, in my tenure with the organization. And so, and it's really been about developing their skill set to position them to lead their various functions. And so, I think, again, if in the seat that I'm in, I don't see it as I'm going to be the marketer that's going to put my flavor on Tidy, but it's like, how do I support and equip the folks that are, quite frankly, closest to the work? I tell my team all the time, listen, I'm asking you all to do things that I never did as a product marketer, right? When I was a product marketer, our sales channel was our kind of communication to the market was through the sales team. Well, now there's like this digital marketing thing. Like, we didn't even have a website when I was a product marketer, right? And so I'm asking them to learn and optimize SEO. I'm asking them to do, social campaigns. I never did social. So really my job is to support and equip them and clear the way so they can do great work. And so again, as a CMO, because most of us are so far removed of the day-to-day of product management and, quite frankly, the day-to-day of the advances in marketing, we have to recognize that our job is to clear the way so great work can happen, which means that we support and equip the team that's closest to the work. And I think that's where the longevity comes in, because now you get on this like cycle where you're like, I just want to see the company continue to improve. And so I think it's just a little bit of a maybe different purview for me.
Yeah. That's great. Okay. So we came here with a specific intent. Let's get to it, guys.
Sure.
Uh, we we have established how challenging it is to be a leader, any given day or
Yeah.
any given year, I should say. But right now, what are some of the things executives need to focus on to keep their teams, pointed in the right direction during these super tough times? There's
Yeah.
just challenges everywhere.
Yeah. So I think a couple things. One, Eileen, listen, unfortunately, we've had like a season of trying times, right? And I think it all began with COVID, when all of us were sent home and had to figure out how to lead remotely, right? And while we were personally navigating through all of the uncertainty in our personal lives, and then having to lead a team when companies were going through uncertainty and all the chaos that ensued. And I think one of the things that I learned in that time frame was the power of communication. I think oftentimes, you can respond better when you know like what's happening, when you're getting the communication necessary. So I think right now about tariffs, right? So that's the current pressure on businesses right now. From day one, we, including the entire leadership team, have been very overt about our point of view on the tariffs, how it's going to impact our business, and the things that are like off the table, right? So we have been very clear, like, some companies are looking at, addressing tariffs by laying people off. That's not the strategy we're going to take. We've been very overt about that. Some folks are looking at changing manufacturing sites. We're choosing not to do that. We've been very overt about that. So I think through this process, we have continued to be very transparent. And I think if companies did not learn during COVID that we have a population of employees that require transparency, it was a mislearning. You create more chaos and uncertainty when you're not transparent through the process. I think the other dynamic is, I think you also have to be authentic at this stage, right? And recognize that the pressures that you're experiencing personally are the same pressures that your people are experiencing, and probably to a greater extent because they don't have the full view of what's happening in the company. I just came off of a retreat with my team, and one of the sections, when I closed out the talk, I talked about self-care. And I just acknowledged that this is a hard time that we're in. It's fiscally, it's uncertain. If you're raising children, it's uncertain. If you have aging parents, all these things are uncertain right now. And that's a lot of pressure. And I literally could see people tearing up in the room. So that just meant that that is what people are wrestling with. But if you as a leader ignore that, you don't give people a safe space to be their authentic self.
Mm-hmm.
That's really important. And Eileen, I know that you subscribe to that theory as well, and you've been talking about it for years, making sure that the people around you are, are doing okay mental health wise. So I know that's
Yes,
something that you care deeply
100%.
about as well.
Yeah, that's very good.
Well, at our core, Can You Hear Me is a program where we focus heavily on using effective communication to solve issues in the C-suite. So you talked about it a little bit about just sort of, it feels like, real self-awareness and what's going on around me and that sort of thing. But how do you think leaders like yourself need to view the communication process? And not too long ago, there was a lot of top-down communication where everybody took orders from above. These days, the leaders who are successful understand it's a two-way exercise, and they're a little bit better engaged. Is that something that, aside from the paying attention to others, is it also, hey, I don't have all the solutions, and I don't need to be having these folks be order takers. I need them to be giving me actionable, good advice so that I can make the best decisions for our marketing department?
100%. Listen, it is disrespectful as a leader to assume that at the top, the farthest person away from the customer, you have all the answers. Period. It's disrespectful. If I think about, projects that are ensuing in my organization right now, I've not spent 40 hours at the customer observing how the product is being used bedside. They have. So for me to assume that my experience bedside way before COVID even happened, I won't say how many years before, is the same as it is today is disrespectful. Okay. So I think first and foremost, as a leader, my job is not to give orders, because how can you give orders when you're not in the room when it's happening? Right. So I think that's one part. I think the second part, though, is that what is also disrespectful and a little bit of you are shirking on your responsibility as a leader, is that you're not spending time with the team in what I call sausage making to understand how they're translating the insights they've gleaned into actions. Because again, while I wasn't in the room where it's happened, I've got decades of experience on the folks that work for me. So my job is to go into the room when they're having these conversations and help ask the right questions to help expand their thinking beyond what they saw. So as a leader, I think to not be engaged in the work, to not respect the insight of those that are closest to the work is quite frankly disrespectful, and it's limiting. If my 50 plus people are waiting on me to tell them what to do, we are going to do like 5% of what's possible for this organization to do. So again, that's why I always tell people, like, my purpose as a leader is not to do the work, it's just to clear the way so they can do great work. And because of where I sit and because of the experience I have, I might be able to clear the way a lot quicker than they could on their own. But I only know that if I'm in the room when it's happening, when they are in the sausage making, trying to take what they've learned and do something about it. So yeah, I mean, it is 100% a two-way street. And then this is where servant leadership comes into play. Again, I think about this retreat I just got back from. That entire agenda was built by them. It was a feedback off of the last retreat that we had to say, this is what I wish we could do to make it better. And that's how we built the agenda. And let me tell you one thing better. I didn't build the agenda. The team did. All I did was to create the space for them to be able to do it. That's your job as a leader.
That's great. I could ask you a million questions about that retreat. I'm sure I could.
Oh, it was fast. It was amazing. It was so amazing. I enjoyed every moment.
So I'm not going to derail us, but I can't. My curiosity is too strong. I have to ask one question. So they created the agenda. And was
Mhm.
there any kind of direction setting before the agenda was created, or was it, I know you said it was built off of a prior,
Yeah.
but was it, how blank really was that
Yeah,
canvas?
great question, Eileen. So I told them two things. I said, one, the purpose of this is we're 50 plus people that are fully remote, and this is an opportunity for a day and a half for people to get back together. So let's make sure we create the space for connection. That was one. The second thing I said to them is one of the areas that I'm focusing on advancing the chops of my team is systemic thinking. How do you really understand the interconnectedness of everything so that we can make the right decisions for the customer? And so I said, let's couch the content in systemic thinking. And that was it. That was all. And they went and did that from there.
That's amazing.
Oh, that's phenomenal. They're obviously very bright people to be able to,
I'm so
yeah,
lucky. Yeah,
have
they are
taken
amazing.
that minimal guidance and done something meaningful with it. Because
Yeah, it was amazing.
systemic thinking is pretty complex. So
It is
that's
very
fantastic.
complex.
Yeah,
It's very
exactly. Right.
complex. It
I
is.
mean, I'm totally fascinated by it too.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it's
fun,
pretty
fun,
amazing.
fun. But
Yeah,
that's great.
yeah,
Oh, how fun. Okay. Um, all right, I did have a question, and I'm going to pull you back to, you said on the tariff topic, you
yeah.
said that you know what you're not going to do,
Mm-hmm.
which is, I think you alluded to, no layoffs.
Yeah.
Um, what I really want to get into is, for your organization and in your role in particular, what are you really worried about when it
Mm,
comes to this tariff,
mm,
threat and I guess reality now?
yeah.
And how are you and your executive leadership team kind of sorting through,
Yeah.
dealing with potential impact?
Yeah.
I,
So I
I'm,
think,
I'm curious about the process.
yeah. So what am I, if anything kept me up at night, it's not keeping me up at night. But I think, I won't get into like a political session. I think it's a ton of waste, right? So I just think about the amount of time and capacity that we've even spent trying to plan for all the things we might do as a result of these tariffs, right? And so I think we've wasted a lot of time that had zero to do with creating value for customers. Zero to do with creating value for customers. And so I think
Mm.
that's one thing that just is like frustrating for me. It's a ton of waste. I think the other thing that just worries me about it is it all rolls downhill. And if we think about in the industry that I'm in, there's a reason why those products have been offshored, because this is a sector of our world that has the thinnest profit margins, but makes one of the greatest impacts on humanity, healthcare. And so I think when you think about the desire to kind of near shore, like, listen, we saw the impact of access to supplies during COVID, right? And so to now put a significant price tag on those same supplies is only going to continue to burden what is already a pretty burdened healthcare system. So I think as we think strategically as a business, we're continuing to think about how do we create products and services that takes some of the burden off of our healthcare providers so they can do what they do best, which is provide patient care. So I think we continue to think about innovation in that regard. But we also have to think about, we have an assortment of products in our portfolio. Some of those products will not be as profitable, and so we may have to make different decisions about the availability of those products out of our portfolio. Those are tough decisions to make because, again, that impacts patient care. So I would say, we continue to wrestle with site of manufacturing. We're not going to make any sudden changes right now because, like, where would you go? And then we continue to wrestle with, whatever the burden is that we are seeing from tariffs, how do we, in a respectful manner, pass it along to the market? I think that's the other thing that we have to think through. I think fortunately for us, we made some decisions that the majority of our products are at this point in time not being impacted, but that could change tomorrow. And so it's really how do we continue to innovate and drive continuous improvement to just make it a lot easier to be more nimble is what we're focusing on. And trust the team that's closest to the work.
Yeah.
Again, I think they're the source of innovation. It's interesting. When we started like looking at the impacts of tariffs, ingenuity came from the team around other ways that we might be able to offset costs that had nothing to do with people, had nothing to do with product, but had things to do with inefficiencies in our organization. That came from the team that was closest to the work. from an executive leadership perspective, we never would have seen these things because we're just not close enough to it every day. So I think that's part of it too.
That's an interesting insight that I bet most of us have not heard about. That there can be some good, if you will, that gets out of the situation, like even if it's a tiny amount. But still, it's interesting that when you in tough times you do have to innovate. So it sounds like you guys are doing.
Never waste a good crisis. I think some Chicagoan said that, right?
Yeah,
somebody said that.
Someone in Chicago
with a different application, but yes,
for sure,
right,
for sure.
So JJ, the tariff situation is the latest challenge that companies face that is not of their own making, but historically it seems to happen every few years. COVID being the last one of note, the big one. So when you're delivering messages that may be tougher in these more difficult times, and the news might not be great, why is it important to get out in front of it in a candid and authentic way?
Yeah, I think one, I always tell my team, bad news never gets better with time. That's only wine. So it does not get better with time. And I think the sooner you can get the bad news out, the sooner you can get more eyes and ears and thoughts and brains to think about how we might innovate around it, right? And so I think the sooner you do that, the better. I think the third thing is like, listen, you have to equip your people with a basic level of knowledge so they can like rest. I'll go back to the tariff dynamic. If we had been evasive about tariffs and folks started making up their own story, then they start responding to their own story. And then people start looking for other jobs. And then then there's this whole disruption that happens versus if we can say, hey guys, here's our current point of view. Here's how we're going to address it. Here's what our decisions are at this point in time. People can like put that to the side and get back to doing work. And so I think that's another part is in the absence of kind of that information, people fill it up with their own information. And you've got to kind of control the narrative, which Rob, I think you can appreciate that. We got to be able to control the narrative. And so I think that's the, it just does, bad news just does not get better with time. Listen, I've had to deliver bad news. And during COVID, shortly after, we had to lay people off. Like that had to happen. And as difficult as that was, you have to just deliver it with facts and begin to move through the emotions of all that. And then quite honestly, be there to catch people as they're navigating through these emotions, right? So you can't just drop bad news and then run. Like you've got to be present in kind of the process of accepting and understanding what that news or that impact is for those folks individually.
Have you ever had a situation, JJ, where perhaps folks in your C-suite you had to convince them, we have to do this and we have to do it now?
Great question.
And how did you do it if it happened?
Yeah, I mean, so what's interesting, I've been fortunate in the organization that I'm in right now. And because this has been, prior to that, I was like a couple of rungs down from the executive level. But particularly in this organization here, I think we have a very pragmatic and balanced approach. And so I think that, even to go back to how we have communicated, I don't believe there's ever been a time where there's been dissent about the communication. There's been catchball on the how, but never dissent about the communication. I think it was very much driven by the lead, our CEO, in the position that he took. So I would say from an executive perspective, we've always pretty much been on the same page. I think in times where I've had to convince maybe the team or our leadership team of a different way, it's really taking the emotion out of it and serving up the facts. I think that is the key, and giving people space to, because one thing I read a while ago and I think again, it talked about the fact that in most debates, you actually agree on like 98% of the topic, right? And there's only like this 2% where you get hung up on. But because you don't recognize where you agree, you end up arguing things that you agree on and you waste the time. And so I think that's one of the strategies is like, how can I land on what we agree to so that we can move past that and really like navigate through the dissent. But I would say, we have, because of the systems in place that we have, I don't know that we've ever had a scenario here where we've been out of alignment on decisions to a point where it's like a long battle to get us to a point to get on the same page.
That's great. You're very fortunate.
Mhm.
I
But
I
Absolutely.
fully I fully recognize that. Yeah,
yeah.
it has been a great move for sure. For sure.
Well, it's also a sign that you're in the right place. It's
Mm-hmm.
another,
Agreed.
yeah,
Agreed.
for
Agreed.
sure. Well, JJ, I hate that we only have so much time on this show. I got to
It's
tell
fine.
you, like, I
It's fine. I
actually
can come
hate
back.
it. Can you please? That
Of
would be
course, I'll come
crazy.
back.
Thank you. Okay, we'll find a new iteration
Yes.
to talk about. But before we go,
Yeah.
as always, I love how knowledgeable our guests are. You've been incredibly, you've shared so much insight and great, examples and guidance. But before we go, is there anything else specific that you would like to
Yeah.
say? Because we do love to have very actionable things for our listeners. Anything else that
Yeah.
you'd like to impart? The
Yeah.
floor is yours.
Yeah, so I think a couple things. I think it's and tied to the topic of how do you kind of lead through difficult times and communicate thereof. I think the other thing I would remind leaders is that you're human, and you yourself are processing through what are difficult times. You yourself are processing through the impact of whatever. This today it's tariffs. A few years ago it was COVID, and so all of that is real. And I think before you can show up authentically for your people, you have to show up authentically for yourself and recognize where you're struggling, recognize when you need to take a beat, recognize when it's hard, and acknowledge that. And I think the moment you can do that, you can then begin to step into the shoes of the people that you have the privilege of leading, because you yourself have processed through it. So I would say never forget that you're not oblivious to what's going around you just because you're a leader. And I think what's interesting as a leader is that we carry our burdens, and then we tend to carry the burdens of the people that we work for. And unless you can authentically acknowledge the burdens you're carrying, it's hard for you to do that for someone else. And so I would say make sure you're taking the space, because these are very difficult times, and I don't suspect they're going to get much easier. And so I think the more we can practice self-care and taking a pause as a leader, the better leader you'll be for those that are with you.
Amen to
Mhm.
that.
So, real quick, when you talked about self care at your retreat, was there
Yeah.
anything specific that you guys, dove into on that
Yeah.
topic? Yeah.
And you know what? So what I reminded my team of, Eileen, is so because we're all fully remote, people spend 8+ hours a day on this like Teams environment. And so literally in the midst of COVID, I began to put what we call a daily department pause and reflect on everyone's calendar. I blocked their calendar from like 11:30 to 1 every day. And I reminded my team that that's their time and not ours. And that means if you want to take a nap, have at it. If you want to go for a run, fine. If you want to have lunch with your spouse, which I do every day, like do those things that will refill your tank. And it's on the calendar for that reason. And so it was really the reminder, Eileen, that I'm not asking you to do something after hours. I'm just asking you to take advantage of the space that you've already been given. And that was the
Mm.
reminder.
From
That's
one remote
great.
worker to the other.
I know,
Eileen's like,
right?
yes.
I know. I know.
Great.
So true. So true.
Mhm.
That's what we'll talk about next time,
Perfect.
JJ.
This is
Yeah.
great. This is
Oh
great.
my
This
gosh,
is
we're gonna have
awesome.
so much fun. Okay.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh,
Oh
it's been great.
gosh. So just to close it out formally, Jennifer Jones, JJ, CMO of Tidi Products. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for
I'll make
having me.
sure that we leave your LinkedIn
Please do.
profile so that folks, if they have questions, they can reach
Sure.
out to you just to, learn more because you're one very smart human being.
Oh my
Thank you
God.
for
Every
being
time
here
I'm around her, my IQ goes up about 10 points. And
until
then
you
it, and then
leave.
and then and then I quit talking to her, it goes back down.
Do, 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 do. That's so funny.
Bummer.
Thank you both.
Okay.
Listen, I got to tell you, JJ, it was a pleasure having you on. Thank you for all you
Likewise.
do. Thank you
Thank you.
for your willingness to share some of these great ideas. And that's going to do it for another edition of Can You Hear Me? I'm Rob Johnson. If you want to comment on the podcast or suggest a topic, please contact us at our Can You Hear Me podcast page on LinkedIn.
And
Sweet.
I'm Eileen Rochford. If you like what you heard today, listeners, please consider giving Can You Hear Me a positive review on platforms like Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love it because your reviews help other folks or potential listeners find our show. Thanks, everybody. We
Awesome.
hope you learned something today. Till next time.
Bye. Bye.